The drone's lights cut through black water, and for a moment, nobody on the boat said a word. 240 feet down in a fjord that shouldn't have held anything larger than a fishing wreck, a shape was emerging from the silt. Long, symmetrical, metal. The pilot operating the remote camera leaned closer to the monitor. "That's not a boat," he said quietly. It wasn't. As the drone drifted lower, 4 engine nacelles came into view, then a tail fin still bearing traces of paint, then the unmistakable outline of a bomber's fuselage resting almost perfectly level on the seabed, as if it had simply been set down rather than crashed. There was only one problem. According to every official record anyone could find, no aircraft had ever gone down in these waters. Not during the war. Not after it. This fjord was not on any crash list, any search grid, any archive. So what was an American heavy bomber doing at the bottom of a body of water where, according to history, nothing had ever fallen? And if the record was wrong about that, what else about this aircraft's story might be wrong too? For the first hour, the team did nothing but look. The wreck lay in near total darkness, the kind of cold, mineral-rich water that turns a flashlight beam into a narrow, trembling cone. Silt rose in slow clouds with every current shift, swallowing the frame and releasing it again like a held breath. Marine growth had softened every hard edge of the aircraft, coating the wings in a pale film, but beneath it, the metal skin was intact. No violent scattering of debris, no crater, no sign of an aircraft that had come apart in the air. Whatever had happened here, it had been controlled or something close to it. The drone crept along the fuselage, its camera catching fragments of a story frozen mid-sentence. A propeller blade, bent backward but not shattered, suggesting the engines had still been turning, just barely, at the moment of impact. A gun turret, glass long gone, open to the water like an empty eye socket. And near the nose, faint under decades of sediment, the ghost of a painted number. They could read enough to know what they were looking at. A 4-engine American heavy bomber, almost certainly a B-24 Liberator, one of the workhorses of the Allied air war. Thousands had been built. Hundreds had been lost. But this one had a number, and a number meant a name, a crew, a mission, a version of history that existed somewhere in a filing cabinet an ocean away. The team's lead diver, a woman named Ingrid Solvang who had spent 11 years mapping wrecks in these waters, had seen fishing boats, ferries, even a Cold War submarine hull down here. She had never expected a bomber. "I've dived every wreck logged in this fjord," she said later, still visibly unsettled. "This one isn't logged. It doesn't exist, and yet here it is, more intact than half the wrecks that are on the list." That was the first real discovery. This was, without question, a World War II-era American bomber. The second discovery came almost immediately after, and it made the first one far stranger. The aircraft's nose was facing the wrong way. Every wartime flight path through this region ran roughly east to west, toward the coast, toward home bases, toward safety. This aircraft was pointed inland, deeper into hostile territory, not away from it. If it had simply been struck and gone down, momentum and glide would have carried it forward, continuing its original course. Instead, everything about its resting position suggested the crew had been turning, deliberately and at the very end. Turning toward danger, not away from it. Nobody on the surface had an explanation yet, but they had a question now, and it was the kind that keeps a team coming back to the water long after the first dive should have ended. Solvang had not set out looking for a lost bomber. She had been searching for something else entirely, a fishing trawler that vanished in the 1960s, its disappearance still an open case for a family that had never stopped asking. The drone's sonar had picked up an anomaly on a routine sweep, a shape too large and too rigid to be geological. She almost didn't investigate. The trawler was the priority. The wreck could wait. It was a colleague who convinced her to send the camera down anyway. 5 minutes, he said. If it's nothing, we move on. It was not nothing. What kept Solvang on this wreck for the following weeks wasn't professional curiosity alone. It was the position of the aircraft, the inland heading, the intact fuselage. The total absence of any record. Somewhere, she thought, there was a crew who never came home, and a family, or several families who had spent 80 years believing a version of the ending that might not be true. "You start diving for wrecks because you like the mystery," she said. "You keep diving because you start caring about the people." She knew the risks going in. Cold water wreck diving at this depth left almost no margin: narrow passages inside the fuselage, silt that could reduce visibility to 0 in seconds, jagged aluminum that could tear a suit or a line. Every entry into the airframe would be planned in advance, timed and rehearsed. There would be no improvising once she was inside. But first, the paperwork. Before anyone went inside that fuselage, Solvang needed to know what aircraft this was, and what history already claimed had happened to it. The research took longer than the diving. Cross-referencing squadron records, missing aircrew reports, and unit war diaries, the team narrowed the wreck to a specific bomber group that had flown missions from a coastal airbase in late 1944. One aircraft from that group had been reported missing on a night mission. Engine trouble reported over radio, a descent through cloud cover, then silence. The official file listed the lost location as open water, more than 60 miles from where the wreck now sat. The crew, 10 men, had been declared missing, presumed lost at sea. No wreckage was ever recovered, no bodies were ever found. The case had been closed for 8 decades. The men were not abstractions in that file. The pilot, 23 years old, had been on his 14th mission, 3 short of completing his tour and going home. The navigator had a wife who wrote him letters every week for 2 years after he vanished, unable to accept the presumption of death without proof. The tail gunner was 19. His enlistment photo showed a kid who looked like he hadn't started shaving yet. For 80 years, that had been the story. Engine failure, a descent into open water, 10 names on a monument with no bodies beneath it. But the wreck at the bottom of this fjord was 60 miles from where the file said it should be, and it was facing the wrong direction entirely. If the record was accurate, this could not be their aircraft. If this was their aircraft, the record was wrong about almost everything. The first entry into the fuselage answered one question and opened 3 more. Inside the fractured nose section, silt had preserved rather than destroyed. A flight logbook, swollen and fused into an unreadable brick, except for one page near the cover protected in an oilskin case, still legible enough to make out a squadron designation. It matched. This was, almost certainly, the missing bomber. But near the cockpit, wedged beneath a collapsed instrument panel, the drone's arm found something that didn't belong to a routine mission at all. A canvas satchel, sealed, marked with stenciling that had nothing to do with standard aircrew equipment. Whatever it had once contained, it wasn't rations or maps. It was cargo that, according to the official mission log, this flight had never been assigned to carry. That detail should not have been there. Deeper inside, near the cockpit instruments, the throttle lever sat pushed forward, not retracted. The position a pilot uses to gain power, not the position associated with an engine failure and a controlled glide. The altimeter, corroded but readable, had frozen at a reading far lower than any aircraft on a routine transit route should have been flying. This bomber hadn't been cruising home. It had been flying low, under power, on a heading that led inland, consistent with a mission profile nobody in the official file had ever mentioned. The evidence suggested something the paperwork never had. This aircraft had not been lost on a routine flight home. It had been somewhere it wasn't supposed to be, doing something it wasn't supposed to be doing, when it went down. The cockpit held the hardest discovery. 2 seats, side by side, the pilot and co-pilot positions. Restraint harnesses still fastened. That detail mattered more than it seemed at first. Men who die on impact, thrown by force, rarely end up still strapped into their seats decades later, undisturbed. Men who go down under control, who fly the aircraft to the very last second, often do. Near the co-pilot's position, a wristwatch, its case corroded but its crystal intact. Hands stopped at a specific time. A time that, when cross-checked against a nearby listening post's wartime radio log, matched almost exactly with a final, garbled transmission recorded that night. A transmission long dismissed as unrelated interference because it didn't match any aircraft's expected position. It matched this one perfectly. Putting the physical evidence together with the archival record, investigators believe the aircraft suffered serious damage, likely from anti-aircraft fire encountered on an unlogged low-altitude approach. and that the crew, rather than abandoning the aircraft over hostile terrain, chose to nurse it toward the coastline, flying low through a fjord system to stay beneath cloud and radar. The evidence suggests they nearly made it. The throttle position, the intact fuselage, and the level resting attitude all point toward a controlled ditching, not an in-flight breakup. For a few crucial minutes, 10 men who knew they might not survive the night chose to try anyway, together rather than bail into the dark alone. They came down close enough to the coast, in water cold enough that no distress signal, if one was ever sent, would have carried far enough to be answered in time. The identification that finally closed the case came from something almost too small to notice: a signet ring, engraved with initials, found wedged against a bulkhead near the radio operator's station. Genealogical records matched those initials to a single name on the crew roster. Once one man was confirmed, the rest of the puzzle fell into place with him. For the first time in 80 years, a family received something other than a folded flag and a line reading, "Missing, presumed lost at sea." They received a location, a cause, an explanation that finally matched the pain they had been carrying without answers. The mission itself, once reconstructed, explained why the crash site had never matched the official record. The flight had been altered at the last moment for reasons still only partially documented. Its true routing never fully corrected in the paperwork before the war ended and the file was closed for good. Not concealment exactly, just the ordinary, devastating carelessness of history moving too fast to double-check itself. The fjord has been quietly marked as a protected site now, its coordinates shared only with the families and the historians who spent months confirming what the water had known all along. The bomber is still down there in the cold and the dark, engines silent, wings coated in the slow green patina of 80 years underwater. Somewhere above it, the surface of the fjord looks like it always has, calm, unremarkable, giving nothing away. For 8 decades, it kept a secret that history had already closed the book on. It is still there now, exactly where it came to rest, holding the last few minutes of 10 men's lives the way only deep, cold, forgotten water can. Somewhere right now there's another wreck like this one, unlogged, unmarked, waiting for someone to ask the right question. If you want to be there when the next one surfaces, subscribe. This is where those stories get told.